Janitors? The bank teller's voice boomed, a thunderclap in the elegant space. Don't get business accounts here. Keisha Davis was a woman built like a fortress, and her massive frame towered over the customer who stood perfectly still, an island of calm in the storm of Keisha's making. The woman, Vanessa Williams, looked up, her eyes holding a depth no one in that room could possibly fathom. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the rising hysteria like a blade of ice. You have no idea who you're talking to. But Keisha was beyond reason, intoxicated by her own perceived authority. I know exactly what you are, another cleaning lady playing dress-up. Now get your scheming hands off my counter. What the teller didn't know, couldn't possibly comprehend, was that she had just ignited the funeral pyre of her own career. She had no idea who the woman she called a liar and a janitor truly was. Vanessa Williams was the founder and CEO of Williams Tech Solutions, a technology empire valued at $47 billion. While most people her age were still grappling with student loans, Vanessa commanded an empire that rivaled the titans of Silicon Valley. Yet she was a ghost by choice, deliberately shunning the spotlight. There were no magazine covers, no Forbes interviews, no red carpet galas. She moved in a world of private boardrooms and handshake deals that shifted billions, a world whose players remained invisible to the public eye. The worn work badge clipped to her faded jacket was not a janitor's ID. It was an executive access pass to one of her own subsidiary companies, where she had just spent the morning on a surprise inspection. It was a ritual she maintained, a way to stay connected to the roots of her vast enterprise, a reminder of a time when she couldn't afford to be disconnected from a single detail. She wore faded jeans to the bank for a simple reason. She wanted to be anonymous. She wanted no special treatment. Keisha Davis, on the other hand, had been grinding away at Morrison Financial for 12 brutal years. At 35, she had learned to wield her physical presence as a weapon, a tool to intimidate customers she deemed unworthy. Her prejudices were a rot deep in her bones, a twisted logic that placed her, a teller at a prestigious bank, high above the janitors and cleaning staff, anyone who worked with their hands. She was the gatekeeper, and her purpose was to keep people out, to make them feel small. It was a cycle of cruelty that was about to come full circle. When Vanessa walked through those gleaming glass doors on that Tuesday morning, she stepped into a perfect storm of resentment that had been brewing for more than a decade. She had come with a simple goal: to open a personal checking account, separate from the labyrinth of her corporate finances. The bank itself was a cathedral of wealth, all Italian marble, crystal chandeliers, and mahogany panels that hummed with the frequency of old money. She had chosen this specific branch for a reason. This was her old neighborhood. As a hungry teenager, she had once pressed her face against these same glass doors, dreaming of the day she would have enough money to walk through them with dignity. Now, she could buy the building without a second thought, but the memory of that scared kid on the outside looking in had never left her. The moment Keisha's eyes fell on the work badge, her mind was made up. She didn't read the name. She didn't need to. She saw the faded jacket, the simple jeans, and she saw a janitor. "This is a premium bank," Keisha called out before Vanessa had even reached the counter, her voice ringing with practiced authority. "Not a place for the help to cash their paychecks." Vanessa paused. She recognized the tone instantly. She had heard it before, survived it before, and conquered the people who wielded it. "I'd like to open a personal checking account," she said, her voice quiet as she placed her identification on the counter with deliberate care. Keisha let out a saccharine sigh. "Sweetheart," she said, the word dripping with condescension, "you're in the wrong place. The check cashing service is down the street. This is Morrison Financial. We serve a different clientele." The pause was a carefully placed insult, understood by everyone in the lobby. This wasn't about banking. It was about class, about who belonged and who didn't. "I understand where I am," Vanessa replied, her voice still calm, but now with an undercurrent of steel. "I would still like to open an account." This is when Keisha made her first catastrophic error. She doubled down. "Look, honey, I'm trying to help you. Our minimum balance requirements are substantial. Our fees are designed for people with significant assets. You'd be much more comfortable at a community bank, somewhere more appropriate." Each word was a poisoned dart, meant to shame and embarrass. Keisha was performing now, her audience the wealthy patrons of the bank. but she had no idea she was facing a woman who negotiated with world leaders, who had survived corporate warfare that would have broken lesser people. A teller's petty condescension was less than nothing. The situation was about to escalate into one of the most disastrous moments in the bank's history. Having tasted blood, Keisha couldn't stop herself. She snatched Vanessa's ID from the counter, holding it to the light with theatrical suspicion, her lips curling into a sneer. "So, you clean offices at some tech company? That's nice," Keisha said, waving the card. "But here's the thing. Janitors don't need business accounts. This is for real business people. Professionals." The words spread through the lobby like a toxin. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their expensive shoes, but no one spoke. Their silence was a form of consent. Vanessa remained perfectly still, her composure absolute, but a slight tightening around her eyes, an almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, betrayed the monumental effort of her control. "How much do you make mopping floors?" Keisha pressed on, her voice growing louder. 20,000 a year? 15? You scrape together a few $100s and think you can play in the big leagues." She leaned forward, using her size to loom over the smaller woman. "Girls like you should stick to places that cater to your demographic, places where they don't ask where your money really comes from." The coded language was now overt. This wasn't just about class, it was about race. Still, Vanessa said nothing, giving Keisha every chance to step back from the precipice. She could have ended this with a single phone call, but she needed to see just how far the cruelty would go. Keisha took the silence for weakness. "Let me guess," she sneered, her voice now carrying across the entire lobby. "You clean the toilets at Williams Tech? Probably think you're real important because you get to empty their trash." The mention of Williams Tech should have been a blaring alarm, but Keisha was too drunk on her own power to notice the flicker in Vanessa's eyes. "Skinny little cleaning lady," she continued, her attacks becoming more vicious. "Looking like you haven't eaten since your last paycheck. Maybe if you spent less trying to look important and more on actual food, you wouldn't look like a scarecrow in designer knockoffs." By now, other employees had gathered. At that moment, the branch manager, Marcus Thompson, finally appeared. Instead of de-escalating, instead of showing leadership, he sealed his own fate. "Keisha's right," he said, his voice a pathetic blend of authority and cowardice. "This might not be the right fit for our institution." His words were gasoline on the fire. With her manager's endorsement, Keisha felt invincible, and that's when Vanessa moved. Without a word, she reached into her jacket and produced a business card. Simple, elegant, understated. The kind of card that whispered power. It didn't shout. She placed it on the marble counter. Keisha glanced at it, and then erupted into a peal of derisive laughter that echoed off the marble walls. She doubled over, clutching her sides. "You stole this, didn't you?" she gasped, waving the card for all to see. "Williams Tech Solutions. Real executives work there, sweetheart. What's next? You gonna tell me you're the CEO?" The mockery was thick enough to choke on. A few customers chuckled along. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Vanessa said again, her voice cutting through the noise. "Demanding managers now?" Keisha shrieked, completely unhinged. "Typical. When you get caught in a lie, you ask for someone in charge." Her rage hit its crescendo. With a furious grunt, she tore the business card in half. Then, in an act of pure, unadulterated malice, she snapped Vanessa's plastic ID card in two. The crack of breaking plastic silenced the lobby. The pieces fluttered to the floor. "Take your stolen documents and get out!" she screamed, her chest heaving. "We don't serve delusional janitors." The silence that followed was deafening. "Security!" Keisha bellowed, pointing a trembling finger. "Escort this woman out! She's trying to defraud us!" As two guards began to move forward, as cell phones came out to record the final humiliation, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air grew heavy, electric. Vanessa Williams, the woman they had dismissed and destroyed, finally decided it was time. In the profound silence, she knelt gracefully on the marble floor. With deliberate, meditative movements, she gathered every torn fragment of her identification and her card, placing them carefully in her palm. The act was so quiet, so devoid of anger. It was terrifying. She stood, brushed the dust from her jeans, and drew out her phone. Her fingers moved with calm efficiency. "James," she said, her voice a near whisper, yet it carried an authority that froze everyone in place. Implement Protocol 7. A pause. Morrison Financial. Yes, all of it. Every account, every contract, every partnership. Terminate everything. Effective immediately. Keisha, still riding the high of her victory, couldn't resist one last jab. Ooh, calling your supervisor? She taunted. Tell them their janitor got her feelings hurt. She was still laughing, oblivious. But across the lobby, a young teller named Angela Rodriguez had been staring at her own phone, her face draining of all color. With trembling fingers she had typed, Williams Tech Solutions CEO into the search bar. The first result was a photo from an exclusive tech conference. It was a picture of the woman standing at Keisha's counter, the woman whose life they had just torn to pieces. In one photograph, she stood between the CEOs of Apple and Microsoft. In another, she was shaking hands with world leaders and venture capitalists. And that very same woman was, at this moment, being systematically humiliated in their lobby. The color drained from Angela's face as she scrolled frantically through the search results. Features in Forbes, cover stories in Business Week, SEC filings detailing transactions worth billions. Every source screamed the same impossible truth. The woman Keisha had been tearing down for the last half hour was Vanessa Williams, the founder and CEO of Williams Tech Solutions, one of the most powerful technology companies on the planet. Sir? Angela's voice was a desperate plea, struggling to pierce Marcus Thompson's bubble of self-satisfaction. Sir, I think we've made a terrible mistake. But Marcus was still basking in the glow of having supported his star employee. He waved Angela away dismissively, his focus on what he saw as the successful removal of a nuisance. Don't let her manipulate you, Angela, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Some people are masters at playing the victim when they're caught. This is precisely why we have policies for documentation and verification. Angela stared at her phone, her panic mounting with each headline that confirmed they had just committed corporate suicide in the most public way imaginable. She tried again, her voice tight with urgency. Mr. Thompson, please, you need to see this. This woman, she isn't— That's enough, Angela. Marcus cut her off, his tone sharp as glass. I don't want to hear another word. Keisha handled the situation perfectly, and I'm proud she upheld our standards. But while Marcus was congratulating himself, a catastrophe was unfolding 3 floors above. In the rarefied air of the executive offices, Patricia Morrison Hayes, president of the bank and heir to a 4-generation financial dynasty, was reviewing quarterly reports when her phone shrieked. It wasn't the gentle chime of her direct line, but the harsh, insistent buzz of the emergency line, the one that only rang when the world was ending. Ms. Morrison Hayes. Her assistant's voice was a panicked whisper. We have a situation. Williams Tech Solutions is on line 1. They're terminating their contract. All of it. $10.2 billion. A chill, sharp and absolute, shot through Patricia's veins. Williams Tech wasn't just their largest client. They were the bedrock of Morrison Financial's entire growth strategy. Losing them wouldn't just crater their quarterly numbers. It would trigger an avalanche that could bury the bank itself. That's impossible, Patricia said, her voice a fortress of calm around the terror clawing at her throat. We just renewed. It's locked in for 5 years. They can't just— Ma'am, her assistant interrupted, something she had never done in 15 years. They're citing an incident in the main lobby, something about Ms. Williams herself being mistreated. The phone slipped from Patricia's numb fingers, clattering against the mahogany desk. Vanessa Williams, the reclusive tech genius who conducted business in shadows and boardrooms, who had chosen Morrison Financial specifically for its legendary discretion. Patricia's mind hadn't yet caught up to her body, which was already in motion. She sprinted through the executive corridors, her heels clicking against the marble like machine gun fire, her heart pounding out a rhythm of pure disaster. She burst through the lobby doors like a storm front, her eyes scanning the stunned crowd, and there, in the center of the elegant space, with the shredded pieces of her identification scattered at her feet, stood Vanessa Williams. Patricia knew her instantly from exclusive round tables and private dinners, the rarefied world of power most people never knew existed. Vanessa was younger, quieter than the other tech titans, but she possessed a gravity that commanded respect from even the most arrogant of billionaires. Now, she stood in Patricia's lobby looking utterly violated, while Keisha Davis hovered nearby, a mask of smug satisfaction on her face that made Patricia's stomach clench with dread. "Ms. Williams," Patricia breathed, the words barely escaping her lips as the full, crushing weight of the disaster settled upon her. Oh, dear God, what has happened here? The atmosphere in the lobby didn't just change, it shattered. Conversations died, movement ceased. The very air seemed to crystallize as everyone, employee and customer alike, sensed they were witnessing a moment that would change everything. The president of Morrison Financial, a woman who commanded the attention of senators, was treating this supposed janitor with a reverence reserved for royalty. "I am so profoundly sorry," Patricia continued, her voice trembling with genuine terror as she took in the scene. The torn ID, the scattered card, and the expression of absolute calm on Vanessa's face, which was somehow more menacing than any outburst of rage. But Keisha, still the hero of her own delusion, couldn't process what she was seeing. "You know this cleaning lady?" she asked, her voice laced with the same condescending tone she'd been using all morning, oblivious that she was speaking to her boss's boss. Patricia turned, and the look on her face was one of such profound horror it was a spectacle in itself. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 4 generations of legacy crumbling in real time. "This," she said, each word a sledgehammer blow, "is Vanessa Williams, CEO and founder of Williams Tech Solutions. She is worth $47 billion. She is our single largest client, representing 30% of our total assets under management." The ensuing silence was so absolute it felt as though the world had stopped breathing. Keisha's face cycled through a series of expressions that documented the complete demolition of her reality. From confusion to disbelief, from disbelief to dawning horror, and from horror into the vacant stare of total devastation. Marcus Thompson felt his knees buckle, the realization hitting him that 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder had just been incinerated by 30 minutes of catastrophic misjudgment. Angela clutched her phone like a lifeline, a terrified, vindicated witness to the moment the most powerful people in the building discovered their own self-inflicted mortal wound. But it was Vanessa's response that would etch itself into the memory of every person present. She didn't scream or rage, she didn't gloat or threaten. Instead, in that same quiet, steady voice, she began to speak. "Your employee assumed I was a janitor because I am black," she stated, each word landing like a stone in the suffocating silence. She said, and I quote, "Cleaning ladies don't deserve business accounts because this bank is for real business people." The recounting was surgical, devastating in its calm precision. She questioned my income, asking how much I make mopping floors. She told me girls like me should stick to community banks. She said I probably stole my business card because cleaning ladies don't have them. With each sentence, Patricia grew paler, Marcus sank deeper into his personal hell, and Keisha began to grasp that she hadn't just made a mistake. She had detonated a bomb of pure cruelty, and she was standing at ground zero. "When I asked for a manager," Vanessa continued, "she called it typical help behavior, and then proceeded to tear up my identification while screaming that you don't give accounts to office cleaners pretending to be executives." Keisha, desperate to salvage a single splinter from the wreckage of her life, stammered, "I didn't mean, I thought, I'm so sorry, I didn't know who you were." Vanessa's reply cut through the plea like a laser. "You knew exactly what you wanted to know," she said, her voice carrying the weariness of a lifetime spent navigating the assumptions of others. "You saw a black woman in simple clothes and decided she was beneath your notice, your respect, and your basic human decency." Patricia began offering everything: immediate terminations, personal apologies, policy overhauls, financial restitution, anything to stanch the bleeding. But Vanessa Williams had already made her decision. The call to her office had not been a threat, it was the execution of a consequence, now irreversible. "The contract is terminated," she said, the finality in her voice echoing through the marble hall like a death knell. "This conversation is over." And with that, Morrison Financial Bank began its free fall into ruin. Keisha Davis watched her life crumble to dust. Marcus Thompson learned that the price for enabling cruelty can be everything you've ever built. The most expensive lesson in respect in banking history was complete, taught by the woman they dismissed as a janitor, who walked out of the lobby having proven that the person you step on today might own the ground you beg to stand on tomorrow. The silence that followed Vanessa Williams out of the bank was the kind that comes after an explosion, when the world is ringing and irrevocably changed. Her footsteps were the last sounds of a dying era. Patricia Morrison Hayes collapsed into the nearest chair, her legs finally surrendering. 4 generations had built this institution, and she had just watched 30 minutes of malice burn it to the ground. The tears that streamed down her face were not just for the loss of a client, they were for the obliteration of a dynasty. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Security guards, the same ones called to remove a fraud, now escorted Keisha Davis from the premises. 12 years of employment were terminated in the 12 minutes it took to review the high-definition security footage, which had captured her every word from 6 different angles. She had committed the most expensive hate crime in banking history, and it was all on tape. Marcus Thompson's fate was a more protracted agony. He was demoted to an entry-level teller, stripped of his title, his office, his authority, a living monument to the cost of cowardice. He would spend the rest of his career as a cautionary tale, a daily reminder of what happens when you empower cruelty instead of stopping it. The news spread through the financial world like a contagion. Banking. While black trended for weeks, the stock market responded with the swift, impersonal brutality of a guillotine. Morrison Financial's share price didn't just fall, it evaporated, wiping out pension funds and retirement accounts. Investors fled, understanding that a bank that could so publicly dehumanize its most valuable client was fundamentally broken. The true devastation, however, was not measured in stock tickers or headlines, but in the ruined lives that spiraled out from those 30 minutes. 6 months later, Morrison Financial had shuttered 12 branches. 4,000 employees, tellers, loan officers, IT specialists, janitors lost their jobs. 4,000 families were upended because one employee couldn't see past her prejudice, and one manager couldn't find the courage to do what was right. And Keisha? The irony of her fate was crushingly poetic. The woman who had mocked a supposed janitor now found herself working overnight janitorial shifts, scrubbing toilets for minimum wage. Her reputation was radioactive. No financial institution would ever hire her again. She had become what she most despised, a living consequence of her own hatred. And so, she found herself pushing a cart through hollow, silent corridors at 2 a.m. She wore a uniform with someone else's company logo, doing the exact work she had once used as a weapon to destroy another woman's dignity. The cleaning company paid her $12 an hour, less than she had once commanded in a single hour at Morrison Financial. Gone was the comfortable middle-class salary. Gone were the benefits, the vacation time, the sick leave, and the pension plan that was now utterly worthless. Every night, as she emptied trash cans and vacuumed carpets in buildings where people like her former self worked, she was forced to confront the devastating truth of what she'd become. She was living the exact life she had assumed Vanessa Williams was living, performing the very job she had mocked, experiencing firsthand the invisibility she had once so casually inflicted on others. But while the ruins of Morrison Financial smoldered and its former employees struggled to rebuild their lives, Vanessa Williams was creating something beautiful from the ashes of that terrible day. She moved her massive contract to the Minority Business Development Bank, a smaller institution that had been serving overlooked communities for decades, never dreaming of handling accounts of this magnitude. The bank's president, Maria Gonzalez, had built her institution on the principle that everyone deserved access to quality financial services, regardless of their zip code or background. When Vanessa's representatives first called, Maria was certain it was a prank. Banks like hers didn't get clients worth $47 billion. They served small business owners and first-time homebuyers. They were the financial bedrock for people who had been turned away by places like Morrison Financial. But the transfer was real. Overnight, the Minority Business Development Bank became one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country. It was suddenly equipped to offer loans and services to communities that had been systematically excluded from traditional banking for generations. The contract didn't just transfer money, it transferred hope. 3,000 new jobs were created in communities that had been written off. Small businesses, denied loans for decades, suddenly had access to capital that allowed them to expand, to hire, to dream. The ripple effects were profound. Property values in neglected neighborhoods began to rise. Schools saw increased funding. Community centers and libraries, once struggling, found themselves with new resources. Local governments reported decreased unemployment and growing tax bases, allowing them to finally invest in long-delayed infrastructure. Vanessa also established the Dignity in Work Scholarship Program, providing full college tuition for the children of service industry workers, the janitors, housekeepers, security guards, and food service employees, whose labor keeps society functioning, but whose contributions are so rarely seen. The scholarship sent a powerful message: every job has dignity, and no one's worth should be measured by another's assumptions. The program was revolutionary. It provided not just tuition, but mentorship, career counseling, and support for students who were often the first in their families to attend college. Within 2 years, it had awarded scholarships to over 500 students, investing in a future free from the cycles of economic inequality. Through it all, Vanessa remained as private as ever, avoiding interviews and public appearances. Her actions spoke louder than any press conference ever could. The woman who had been dismissed as just a cleaning lady had proven that true power isn't about making yourself feel superior. It's about lifting others up. She let her investments be her argument and her results be her response. But the story of what happened at Morrison Financial that Tuesday morning took on a life of its own. It became a case study in business schools around the world, a cautionary tale about the real cost of prejudice. Harvard Business School developed an entire course around the incident. Corporate training companies used it in role-playing exercises, teaching managers to recognize the warning signs of employee bias. The story became a touchstone for discussions about unconscious bias and the vital importance of treating every person with respect. More than that, it became a reminder of a simple, profound truth. Sometimes, the janitor you mock today owns the building tomorrow. Sometimes the person emptying your trash can is the one who can empty your bank account with a single phone call. And sometimes, the individual you treat as invisible has the power to make your entire world disappear. Keisha Davis learned this lesson in the most devastating way possible. Her story serves as a warning to anyone who believes they can judge another's worth based on a uniform or a job title. She went from wielding power to being powerless, from looking down on service workers to becoming one of the people she once despised. But the lesson isn't just for people like Keisha. It's for all of us, in a world that constantly tries to rank people in hierarchies of worth. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. We'll see you in our next video.